We're going to continue switching back and forth between English and Spanish. Ahora damos la bienvenida a Santiago Levy.
I want to welcome Santiago Levy, who is the non-resident senior fellow at Brookings Institution.
Welcome.
Gracias. Gracias. Good afternoon, everybody. Does this work? Good afternoon, everybody. Let me begin by thanking President Ilan Golfin for the invitation. Ilan, thank you very much. It's a very pleasure to be here. Thank also Ferdinando, who will be joining the panel in a minute, who's the person responsible for my being here. It's a pleasure to be back in Paraguay, and it's a real pleasure to see many old friends from the IDB. So I'm delighted to be here. Yeah. Couldn't we put in the, does this work? Okay, so what I'll try to do in the next 10 minutes is frame the discussion, and then from there Ferdinando will take over, and the panel members and I will try to enrich the discussion. So let me begin with a really scary and at the same time fantastic slide. This is kind of a difficult slide to read, but I'll walk you through it. The blue dot, it's the time in which the share of the population, over 60%, was 10%. And the dark blue dot is the year in which that share was more than 20%. The first line is the United States. So around sometime in 1970, in the United States, about 10% of the population was aging. It took the United States 62 years for that percentage to increase from 10 to 20%. Look at Europe. Europe is slightly older than the United States. They began earlier, the aging process, and they will reach sooner, but it took them 56 years to do that. The third line is Latin America and the Caribbean. If you just look at the blue dot, at the light blue dot, we're younger. We're a younger continent compared to the United States. We're a younger continent compared to Europe. But if you see the number of years that it will take Latin America and the Caribbean to go from 10 to 20% of the population being in the elderly ages, it's half of the time that they took. This has never happened in world history. So this is a really different and new phenomenon. There's some variance within Latin America. Look at Uruguay. Uruguay has a particular demography, and in fact is one of the oldest countries in the region for historical reasons. Their aging process is not that dissimilar from Europe and the United States. The other extreme is actually the country where we're today, Paraguay. Paraguay is the youngest country in Latin America, and they have a phenomenal opportunity because they're still not even at the point in which 10% of the population is in the aging process. But for the rest of the countries, and I put there a country in the Caribbean, a large country, Brazil, a small country, Costa Rica, basically is the same. The message is, even though at this point we're younger than Europe and the United States, we're going to age much faster than them, and this is a process that has not occurred before. How does this process look? In this slide, I have years in the horizontal axis. Pay attention to the vertical black line. That's today, 2026. And then the curves for various countries in black, all of Latin America and the Caribbean. Paraguay is in the dotted yellow. Colombia is in blue. There's various countries down there. What you see is the share of the population 18 to 65 relative to the rest of the population. So roughly, who works versus the people who live of the people who work. Either the younger people, less than 18, or those that are over 65. If you look at the black line, the average of all of Latin America, we're exactly at the point now in 2026. We're exactly at the point in which now the number of people that are of working age is beginning to decline. Colombia already passed it. Paraguay not yet, because as I showed earlier, it's a younger country. But for the region as a whole, we're entering a new era. We're entering an era in which now fewer people will have to support a larger share of people. And what does that imply? I'm going to point out three implications. The first implication is economic growth. This slide here shows the rates of growth in emerging Asia, in the advanced economies, and Latin America and the Caribbean. And it decomposes that growth between a component having to do with productivity, how efficiently countries produce, a component having to do with investment, in orange, capital, and then a component having to do with labor in gray. You can see right there that as a region, we've performed very badly. From the point of view of growth, we're a very mediocre region. We're the one that has grown the least. And you can also see there that the reason that that's occurring, because the blue rectangle, productivity, has performed very badly in the region. Now look at the gray. The gray is one of the sources of growth in Latin America in the past. We have grown because the number of people that are working was growing faster than everybody else. So they give us a kick. That gray rectangle is going to get smaller. It's going to get smaller because now we're at that inflection point. So unless we increase productivity, the already mediocre growth of the region is going to be even slower than in the past. And this is challenge number one. Challenge number two has to do with health. Look first at the left panel. The left panel shows what is the cost on average of providing medical services to people between 0 and 49 of age, to people between 50 and 64, between 69 and 79, and 80 plus. And what you can see is somewhere around 65, 70, the cost of providing health services increases a lot. And it's obvious, right? Elder people need more care, they have more ailments, it's more costly to look at them. The lines are very sharp. And what that says, now look at the right panel, is that the share of healthcare costs that are going to go to the elderly, 65 or more, is going to increase by about 2 more points of GDP. Mind you, we're not going to spend more per capita. It's just that the composition of the population is changing, so expending the same is going to require 2 more points of GDP. That doesn't translate in more quality, it's just maintaining as we are, we're going to need 2 more points of GDP to be able to look after these people. And then another challenge, and this is well known to all of us, as we age, the pressure from pensions is going to start going up. Rough numbers, in the next 30 years, we're going to need something like 2.5 points of GDP because more people are going to be living out of pensions. I could go on, but let me just summarize. Economic growth is going to be more difficult because we're at the inflection point of the labor force relative to the rest of the population. Health costs are going to go up even if we don't spend more per capita. And 3, we're going to have to spend more in pensions. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. And the name of the seminar is Opportunities. And there are substantial opportunities. And let me begin by one that is actually, if we do this right, a triple win. The blue line on the left panel is the female participation rate, the number of women that are actually participating in the labor force that are working. In blue is the OECD countries excluding Latin America. And in green below is countries of Latin America. As you can see, there's a wide gap between the participation rate of women in the OECD countries and the participation rate of women in Latin America. If the green line could be brought up to the blue line, that curve that I showed you before, the inflection point of that curve, would be pushed out in time, because now we would have more people in the labor force producing more, advancing more, paying more taxes. So there's a large opportunity by increasing female labor participation. And then look at the right panel. The right panel says, look, there are large differences across income levels in the participation rates of women. Women from high-income households have very high participation rates. But women from low-income households have very low participation rates. So on average, if we increase women participation rates, we're going to help lower-income households more than we're going to help higher-income households. Providing daycare services for children and providing daycare services for the elderly is one way of increasing those participation rates. That would be a win, more people working. 2, more women working and more power for women, more large number of benefits. And 3, if we do daycare right, the children would be better, particularly if we do early child development right. So this is a huge opportunity. And Latin America can do a lot fomenting female labor participation, particularly among lower income households. There are many other opportunities that we can also take advantage. The lines that I showed you, showing expenditures in health by different age groups, assume that the technology is the same and the ailments of people are the same. But there's a large room to increase preventive health. There's a lot that we could be done today, for instance, to control diabetes, for instance, to control high blood pressure, which are 2 of the most expensive and problematic things that are very, very costly in elder age. We can also change hospital practices. There's a lot of technological change around the possibility that people spend recovery at home more comfortable for them and also less costly from the point of view of long hospitalizations, so that if we put more effort into the quality of healthcare, if we put more effort into preventive healthcare, there's a lot to be gained in terms of health. And there's also a lot to be gained on pension systems. Pension systems in the region are very complex. The IDB has done a lot of work on that. But in general, particularly the pay-as-you-go systems, do not provide sufficient incentives for people to go on working beyond 65. And the notion that you should retire at 65 is kind of old-fashioned a little bit. By now, we should think of dynamic retirement ages, and we need to think about pension systems that are actually conducive for people to work longer, so that, like for instance, in some Nordic countries, we can begin to think about indexing the retirement age to the life expectancy. More generally, if we think about aging as a big societal change, this is not a problem of the old people. This is a problem of everybody. Then it could motivate us all to construct almost a development plan around the aging issue. The first thing we need to do is we need to grow more rapidly. We will not be able to address the challenges if we have the same growth rates as before. That has to do with productivity, but it also has to do with generating more savings for investments, and pension system can do for that, and increasing labor force participation, as I mentioned before, particularly in the case of women. So there's things that we can do to grow more rapidly. Number 2, we're going to need to increase tax revenues. We're going to need like 3.5 points of GDP for health and pensions as things are. And that is a big challenge, but at the same time a big opportunity. Why? Because in Latin America, there's a big space to expand tax collections and expand the tax base by combating informality. And because in Latin America, there are a lot of special regimes on the VAT, on the income taxes, on sales taxes, that actually, if you fix them, it's an opportunity because you would increase in efficiency and you also increase tax revenues. So there's a big agenda on the tax side. And lastly, there's a big agenda on providing public services. Daycare services for children and daycare services for the elderly that will both improve their welfare and at the same time allow more women to participate in the labor force, but also changing our views about healthcare is provided, more preventive, less hospitalizations, and in general, better designed pension systems. So this opens up a whole range of opportunities, and rather than letting the railroad hit us, just waiting by as we age, we can be proactive as of today and begin to take the measures that can actually allow the region to confront this challenge. This is my last slide. For any of this to happen, a discussion about taxation, a discussion about female labor participation, a discussion about the quality and the nature of healthcare, a discussion about patients. These are all very sensitive topics, we all know this. These are all politically difficult topics. But aging can be an opportunity to rethink about these issues and put them in a different light. Because we're all going to be part of that group sometime in the future, and we all have an interest in being able to challenge, to take this challenge the best possible way. The only way this challenge is going to be tackled is if people are informed. And right now, if you ask people, they're overwhelmed because they're thinking about climate change, they're thinking about artificial intelligence, they're thinking about so many people, so many issues. Aging is not there. For societies to react, they've got to be aware that there's an aging process, my first slide, that is historically novel, has never occurred, and that if we get our act together and begin to act, we can actually successfully confront and challenge. And for that, we need seminars like this. So I want to finish congratulating the IDB for putting this issue on the table. I think it's excellent. President Ilan, Ferdinando, I think it's excellent that you've done this seminar. And I am told that the next big report on development in Latin America for 2027 is going to be on the issue of aging. And I already in advance congratulate the IDB because I'm sure that that report, together with seminars like this, are going to create what we most need. An informed social dialogue about the problem ahead, about the opportunities that we have to confront them if we start today. Thank you for listening to me.
Santiago, agradecemos tu presencia.
Thank you, Santiago. Thank you for joining us. And you already took a chair, so thank you, Santiago. Now, I wanted to call Marisol Touraine, former Minister of Social Affairs, Health and Women's Rights in France. So, welcome, Marisol. Also, Susana Muniz, Director of the National Care System and former Minister of Public Health of Uruguay. Laila Vallas, Chief Marketing Officer, Silver Garden, and Joseph Ole, Director of Palau Macaya and from La Caixa Foundation. And lastly, Ferdinando Regalia, who is manager of the Social Sector Department of the IDB. So that is our panel for this seminar, Aging and Growing, Transforming Demographics into Opportunity. So Ferdinando, I'll turn the mic over to you. Thank you.
Switch to Spanish. Sin embargo, tenemos
However, we do have interpretation into Portuguese and English, so if you need a headset, please find one. And first of all, greetings to the panel. This is going to be a conversation. So if you want to speak, I am just going to act as a timekeeper and I will be quite flexible in my role. So before we get started, I wanted to thank all of you. It is truly an honor to moderate this panel. It's wonderful to have you here. I know that some of you came from a long way away, others from near but it is an honor. Also, we want to involve the audience. So we are leaving time for questions. You'll see a QR code that is going to be projected. Please don't wait until the end of the session. So if you have questions, please do send your questions as of now, and I will include them in the discussion. So I wanted to begin the panel with a personal question. Thinking of your own family experience, is there anything that you can remember that have helped you understand what it means to age in this point of our society? I think I'll begin with Joseph. First of all, it's an honor to be here. And yes, I do have an anecdote, something that happened in Barcelona when I was a little boy. My parents took me to Caixa Bank, and I must have been 6 or 7 years old, and they opened a savings account for me, and I think they put in like 5 pesetas. And there I understood because the parents gave me my passbook and said, look, when you're a little old man, you'll be able to take out money. Back then, I really didn't understand what this meant, but now looking back, I do. Well, I began to study about longevity, growth, and that was thanks to my father. He had just retired and he was 62 because he was certain that he was going to die at 70. And there it became an idée fixe. But after some years, he was saying, okay, I'm doing fine. He now has remarried, actually. He fell in love all over, and he's very dynamic, and I truly admire his way of living. And also, now telling you a bit about myself, I just saw some gray hair, but aging is definitely something that lies ahead for all of us. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. And yes, more than academically or politically, my anecdote has to do with a shift in my life. All women are caregivers. For example, my grandmother took care of my grandfather. Now I am the main caregiver of my mom. She's almost 89. So definitely these are things that allowed me to think about this.
Thank you, Ferdinando. And let me just start by thanking you for inviting me. It's a pleasure, a true honor to be with all of you this afternoon here in Asuncion. I also want to talk about my dad. He died at 98. He was an intellectual, and he continued doing conferences until almost the very end. But of course, a few years back, he started to see more challenges in his day-to-day life. He needed more support just to go out and go down the stairs, go out into the street. And I realized that we tend to think of folks who are older as all being the same. But I realized through him that we needed to think about how different situations could be. He had a few friends with him that were not seeing the same challenges, who needed a lot more support, who just needed to rely more on others. And it wasn't so much about thinking about whether somebody was dependent or independent. We need to think about how age changes you, how aging changes you, and how different circumstances can be for any given individual. And so with him, I also realized that having a society made up of folks who are 80 plus or 90 plus and still in good health was a fantastic opportunity to have intellectual, social, and financial exchanges. And I think that that is a great life lesson for me. Thank you, Santiago. Last but not least, well, I have a very personal anecdote here. I thought about aging because I would wake up in the morning with my back hurting, and every morning my back hurt. In the opportunities, and I like the idea of challenges and opportunities here. The opportunity comes from the fact that my wife signed me up for the gym, and she forced me to go to the gym. And now, when I go, I realize that I'm more active, I have more energy, and I feel a lot better. And so that brings me back to care. If we rethink care, we rethink ages, what 65 used to mean for getting older is no longer the same thing. Now, when we think about culture and mental aptitudes and what you can do socially, there's a lot more that you can do to ensure that people can live longer with full lives. So, well, as we have heard from these personal stories, we've heard important policy issues already emerge. So, Marisol, let me start with you. France has been adapting its social contribution systems for decades, taking this into account, healthcare, pensions, care systems. What were the hardest decisions that France had to make? Well, thank you very much. I'll tell you this, the social safety net system in France is 80 years old. Culturally, it's really important. It's important politically, but also really important democratically for the people of France. And so that means that everyone is paying close attention to ensure that it continues to work. And this is how we realized what was happening. Of course, the social protection wasn't about any specific policies that needed to be added to anything, but rather looking at it systemically, holistically. And so at the end of the last century, we started to think about these changes, but thinking ahead at an aging population. And with two sets of what I would call fundamental decisions, there were many others, but the first had to do with amending the pension system so that folks would retire later. And that really was the most difficult and challenging thing in France. And that's because retirement and the social safety net system is associated by everyone to with progress. And so that meant that we had to tell people that they had to work longer. That was very difficult. How did I do it? I did it with a reform that I put on the table where I really brought things home for people, for the individual, social policies. And I think that that was the key. So what we said is not that everyone needs to follow the same rule. We are going to have to work more, but in a differentiated way, because working outdoors your entire life on a construction site is not like working in a white collar job in an office. That was the first way that we were able to get ahead of this discussion on aging. The second had to do with care. We hadn't thought about it 80 years ago. So we started to build it in the 80s or 90s. And that started with the family. The family policy is really important. And in France, what we did was very ambitious. And here's what I'm trying to say. Of course, we have implemented a whole host of services for families. And these are home services and school-based services. But what was most important is that we were actually responding to something women were asking for. That's the real topic here. My message is that our mantra was ensuring women's workforce participation. Because the idea is that if women are able to go to work, it's a win-win. Women would go to work, their children were taken care of, they themselves could become professional caregivers for others. So, of course, there were other reforms, but I would say that the main thinking here was how to uh, really look at the pension system from an individual perspective and looking at a policy that focus on bringing women into the workforce. Thank you, Marisol. Just want to go back to this point you made for follow up. We know that all social safety net systems around the world are under a lot of pressure. Is there any policy or any reform that is not being utilized as much in France that you think would be key for a new stage? Well, I didn't talk about the healthcare policy, which of course is very important. And we know, as you said, Santiago, just a few moments ago, what we're thinking in France is that healthcare expenditures is going to increase by 4% over the next couple of decades. Something that we need to flesh out more is prevention. And why prevention? Well, because it also has to do with the care policy and healthcare policy and how we're organized as a society. So I think that that is something that could lead to a lot of funding for the people and the government. Thank you. So with that, let me now move to a key partner in our network here, Josep from the Caixa Foundation. And I know that Caixa has been working for decades on issues in Spain related to this. And so what are you seeing on the ground? What changes are you seeing in the quality of services to help a growing segment of the population, older folks? Well, sure, yeah. If I could just focus on three big things, and I'll start everything I want to say with a few thoughts. What was already said here is what I have to reiterate. Not every older person is the same. You have to think about what it means to be an adult and an older person, and no two of us are the same. And something else that was raised is that we're not just living longer, we're living differently through the different stages in life. Also, in terms of what the senior program team does, Javier Yanguas that leads that team, and we identified three main pillars. The first is how important it is to continue to be connected with society. So we see an increase in solitude, and especially the one that makes people think existentially. And this is why the foundation has put a very important focus on addressing this unwanted solitude, this loneliness. Also, care. The existential issue, the classic system no longer addresses the current needs. We're hearing increasing demand for a care that takes into account identity, values, and this idea of continuing to live longer but feeling like you're still at home. We also have programs that provide support to individuals in order to have a dignified end of life. And I should also add that there is a growing willingness to ensure that older people can contribute to society. There are a lot of older folks who don't want to step out of society. You can retire from your job, you don't retire from your community. And so as we think about how to take on new roles and continue to feel useful, that's key. And as I said before, we have over 20,000 different activities that we promote in different parts of Spain and in Portugal also, where we've been for a few years. And I would just go back to the three things. One is that there is a commitment to deepening these social relations. Secondly, improving care. And third is creating opportunities for everyone who is older to continue to be an active member of their society. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of the foundation? I know that we're talking about the public-private nexus yesterday. And I think that the model that you have is really important and we can learn a lot from it. Well, I do believe it. I think that that partnership between government and the private sector are at the heart of what we're doing in Kasha, and it's something that we've been thinking about for a long time. As we see it, we are an indispensable partner when it comes to philanthropy in order to really address the social challenges. I'll say three things. I love my threes, and so let me start with philanthropy. We try to drive social innovation. The fact that we're smaller, we're more flexible, and I think that that really allows us to pick up on emerging needs and implement programs, assess them, and then, when necessary, share them, implement them. This is something that I believe helps us contribute. And I'm sorry if I don't sound very modest, but contribute in a way that's really innovative. And when it comes to civil society, I mean, for many years, philanthropy, and I think this is the case in Spain, but also in other places, has been key to really turning on the switch on engagement with that community engagement and making sure that there is that collaboration. And then that also allows us to pick up on new concerns and then do something about that. Lastly, I think that that reality makes us a bridge between government and between companies. That allows us to be able to propose partnerships between different sectors and different players. And so we believe that these are three key features, making it easier to have social innovation and engaging with civil society and creating partnerships. And I think that in this context environment we operate in, it helps us pick up speed. Thank you very much. That's actually a shared vision with us at the bank. We are going to take a quick flight, if you allow me. We'll fly from Europe to Latin America. We have Susana and Laida who are with us, which is an honor. Susana, Uruguay has broken ground in the region when it comes to care, and it was really the first country to put this topic on the agenda. The care system is being built in a context of very stretched resources. So we want to know, what have you learned? And I know that we've really studied what has happened outside of the region to then bring it into the region. That's been really useful for countries getting off the ground. Can you share your thoughts? Thank you very much for that. Yes, Uruguay has a social protection system that's also been around for a long time, but the care system has only been around for 10. We learned a great deal from Europe. We uh, really were sticking noses in the books, looking at what was happening in Nordic countries, in France, in Spain, in the UK. And I would say that there are three main lessons that we first latched onto. The first has to do with France, and that is that dependency bellwether, if you will. We worked a lot on that. But unlike what happened in France, what we do with that continuum is actually get tiered subsidies established. We're also looking at the centralized model has been big, looking at care as people's right, but also focusing on social co-responsibility and gender. Additionally, we also looked at the Spanish model, and what we took from there was professionalization and training those who provide care, and that led us to establishing a national caregiver registry, of course, dominated by women, as it tends to happen. And we had that registry. We also looked at what the curricula and what those different pathways were for people seeking to have the certifications. But we don't really have the financing that we see in Europe. And so we also turn to our brothers and sisters in Latin America to learn from those cases. That's how we learned a great deal. And right now, the 2026-2030 agenda uses Latin American community models. For example, utopias in Mexico, Bogota Manzanas, the community well-being agents, and the Cuida programs from all of our neighbors. And the idea is to come together as a full community as we think about all the different aspects of care. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want the truth and nothing but the truth. Biggest challenge is financing, implementation, or both? I think they're linked, but in Uruguay is very clear on what the destination is. Uruguay wants to have a universal care system. And this is why the key aspect of that is financing. We're currently having engagement with the government, with political parties, with society, also labor associations and different CSOs and associations of retirees and academia. And in that social engagement, we have four pillars. One has to do with childhood poverty. The second has to do with protecting the workforce, the system for retirement and pensions given demographic shift, and lastly is care. And that's where some of the ideas have to do with creating a national care fund that could be similar to the National Healthcare Fund. And in some way, there could be joint fundraising or a way to receive those funds. But what we need to think about too is that with the contributions from what's coming out of the different households, the out-of-pocket costs are continuing to be the same. And so as we think about how much it is, it could be an entire salary for some folks. When we think about the different kids or the aging people in a household, this all has a big impact. And so as we think about all of these different elements, I think they all need to be part of the discussion. Thank you very much. Before I turn it over, you talked about the finance challenge, which is a key topic. And so I want to go back to you, Santiago. In the first part of your presentation, you showed all of the different pressure points coming from the demographic shift and the tension in Europe and many OECD countries. That transition took place when they had already reached a per capita income level that was fairly high. So even in the best case scenario, Latin America is undergoing that transition without reaching those levels yet. So where's the money going to come from? If business as usual continues, we won't find the money. With the exception of Brazil and Argentina, in Latin America, the tax burden is about 5 or 7 GDP points below the OECD average. What does that mean? Well, again, taking out Brazil and Argentina, technically there is room for increasing tax collection and finance a bunch of the things that Susana was talking about. But that's not going to be possible if we continue to have segmented social protection programs. We're not going to get there if we keep thinking that informality is just like the environment and nature. That's how the world came to be, and that's how we are in Latin America. We're not going to get there if only 30% of those who work pay an income tax, and only 20% of businesses pay corporate tax. And we're not going to get there if some of the special taxes also go through a bunch of different systems. And so that's one of many different sets of issues that we have in the region, but they're not resolved yet because there hasn't been a tax reform that provides both equity and productivity. And this is why we keep saying that aging could be a huge opportunity, because we will all age. And it's in all of our best interests to fix that problem and to start fixing it now. Now, there's good news, and that is that in most of our countries, we have the headroom. We can do it, but we need to change the tone of that discussion and of the vision, and make sure that the solutions that we're putting on the table are in line with the challenges that we're facing, and not what usually happens, which is these tiny initiatives. They use all of the economic or political capital in the first year of the new administration. Then they struggle for the next few years, and then there's a new group that wants to do things differently. These kinds of discussions and engagements need to happen throughout the entire region to say, hey, listen, we have time to do it, but the moment is now. And we need to change the vision. I know that the biggest consequences from this will come in 10 or 15 years, but in some countries, we're starting to see some of these things now. Acting now, can you help us think through that? Well, we can do that because what we can say is that we can establish healthcare systems that work a lot better. Marisol was talking about retirement. There's a lot that can be done. Something that in France and in Europe has already been understood is that a functional and inclusive healthcare system is an inherent part of a well-functioning economy. It's not a luxury, it's part of the system. And so this is why the biggest task Latin America has in front of it is redefining its social contract and rethinking its social protection systems. And that is where we get an opening to raise some of these tax reforms that can fund the different ideas that Susana mentioned. Thank you very much. Laila, maybe we can now hear from you. Spanish or Portuguese, your call. We hear about the silver economy, and wanted to know what opportunities have you seen with this aging process, and what concrete silver market opportunities have you seen in Latin America and the Caribbean? Well, I'm wearing two hats here. One as a data scientist from Datos Lactan. So for 8 years now, we've been identifying indicators and data that has to do with that demographic shift and the opportunities, but also as a Silverbound partner. And I'll start with the first hat. We are seeing not only an evolution from the demographic side, numbers and scale, but also how folks who are 50, 60, or older are very different from the stereotype that we have in our heads of these quote unquote older folks. And also from an economic perspective, these are the 50 plus population that have a lot more money and consumption potential in our countries. And I'll just share some numbers. This is an indicator from 2025, and in Brazil, those who are 50 or over consume over $300 billion, and that accounts for 45% of national consumption. That is a lot of money. That's a lot more than some entire industries. And so when we think about aging at the entire societal level, we're not only talking about that and talking about what's lacking, but also the economic power, the market power, things that have to do with tourism, healthcare, of course, care itself, but also other markets that aren't quite as obvious. And so if we wanted to land that and make it more practical, I learned a great deal from IDB Lab, and IDB Lab talks about these three pillars and opportunities for the silver economy and demographic shift. We have the first pillar, which is care. Then that's followed by work and employment. We are going to live older, and therefore we'll need to continue to work and have jobs. And also silver finance. And that is where I switch my hat to partner at SilverGuard. And SilverGuard is there. It's a fintech that helps those who have been digitally scammed. These sorts of digital scams for that get folks to send money, and we have already helped thousands of people in Brazil, and we've helped to recover more than 30 million reals, so that's about $20 million. And this is the money we've recovered from scams. We also help the banks with an anti-fraud platform. And so opportunities is something that's seen more broadly because really aging is wide ranging. We're talking about this consumption power and the changes in the families. We're talking about 64% of Brazilian households have a financial dependence on somebody who's 60 or older. If we look at that situation in other countries in Latin America, it's very similar when we talk about other countries. And so this profile of the older, silver-haired consumer is at the heart of the economy, and so this is why we cannot help but look at them. You were talking about cybersecurity, and if you have a senior, you can see how many attempts there are every month to scam them. And there's some. This is for folks who already have access to a digital platform. When I talk about healthcare reform, I say, well, it's great to have an electronic appointment platform, but I look at my parents and they can't use something like that. And so, what do we do for that significant part of the population that doesn't have this digital literacy to really use these technologies? Great question. I think the first thing is understanding what digital literacy means. Most people already have some sort of smartphone, and that in some way is already digitalization. They have a social media presence. But then how do you go from there to actually making a bank transfer? That's part of it. Looking at those shared responsibilities is another component. It shouldn't only fall to the individual. And here we're talking about financial insurance and what governments can do, but banks need to also take on part of that responsibility, as do digital platforms like Meta, Google. We've reached a level in society that forces us to discuss these kinds of things. We're already talking about them when we talk about children and social media. We're going to need to talk about that when it comes to seniors as well. There's a lot more digital technologies in that segment already, but that financial transaction is going to need a little bit more security when there is any transfer transacted. And that's because cyber fraud is a crisis that doesn't only affect our region, but also the entire planet. In Europe, in the US, everywhere you look, it happens. And it's happening more and more because we are more and more digitalized. We have a behavioral revolution as well. We know that folks who are 50 or older now are a lot more active and have a lot more digital use. Mirzo, I would love to talk to you about talent. We talked about the cost of aging, but there's also a lot of talent and experiences that's huge. There are people who are 65, 67, 70. I have a few cases in my family who don't want to retire. They want to continue working. And so, how do we tap into that human capital? What is Europe doing to really keep this segment of the population also in the workforce?
That is a key issue. And when a while ago I was talking about having a personalized public policy, social policy, it's precisely for that type of situation. So it's not a matter of saying, oh yes, everyone can do whatever he or she wants. But there is a reality, the reality that you just described. There are people that want to continue to work, and the administration, the company says, sorry, you're 65, or you're 60, or you're 70, a lot depends on the country, so you're going to retire. You're going to retire, like it or not. And my first reaction to that is there's a lot of ambiguity in societies, at least in Europe, because everybody is fascinated with youth. We're all focusing on young people. At the same time, we're saying you have to work longer and longer. But when the company has a worker who is 55 who says, I would like to do something else. I would like to go into training. The company, the administration, management says, no, no, no. You're not going to do that because you're old. You're old. And we're going to lay you off. We're going to get rid of you. They don't say it, of course, but that's what they're thinking. So my first message is collectively in society, we have to change the way we see older people. With a population that is aging, you cannot think that at the age of 55, we are completely worthless. And number two, you have to think, and that is what we're doing in France, but in other countries in Europe too, you have to think about incentives. For example, if you retire later on, you would get a bonus. In other words, there is an increase in your pension pay. It's not proportional. But a second measure that we took, which is quite popular in France, is that we're facilitating work for retirees, people that are receiving a pension, but at the same time they can begin to do a new job, either the job they already had or some other job, and that too is an advantage because it facilitates the transmission of knowledge and expertise. Another idea, and this is something that is being done in the Scandinavian countries, but also in France and other countries, is what we call a progressive retirement, where you begin, say, at the age of 60. You work a little bit less, but you still work longer, because that is not as tiring. So there are several ideas that do work, but I go back to my initial message. That means that you have to accept the idea that seeing someone working at the age of 65 or 70 or even later isn't something that's absolutely terrible. Society cannot depend only for those people between the ages of 25 and 55 who continue to work. Look, I don't know. Perhaps I'm aging, but they just took some time away from me. I didn't realize that I had lost the 10 minutes, so I don't know. But we're talking about technology, and there can't be a panel without talking about artificial intelligence. So what do you think? Well, how can we involve AI? Just a few words. It is impossible to not think of what AI can do. It is going to revolutionize caregiving, health policies, hospitals, etc. But it's not a reason to forget that the main perspective we have is professionalizing caregivers, making their work a career with training, because as was just said by another panelist, that has nothing to do with loneliness. It doesn't have to do with identifying needs. A robot cannot do that. We need men and women. We need people who are professionals in this area. And that is my key message. Caregiving isn't something that I do like I would do at home for members of my family. No. This is a profession, and it is something that you have to do in a very professional, continuous manner. Thank you. I'm sure the technology then would be helpful, yes, but as a support. This is a sector that is highly reliant on human contact. Now, I wanted to ask you about the role played by foundations. Let's talk about how we can make good use of the experience of the senior population. Yes, I would say, on one hand, I think that we do have evidence of the need to continue to do research studies so as to insert in the social debate ideas for policymakers, for institutions, so that those who need to make decisions can make decisions wisely based on evidence. And another thing that foundations do, in addition to philanthropy, is they need to encourage the active engagement of seniors in society. So I'm going to go back to what I said before. So you retire from your job, but not from life. So people live 20, 30 years, and their health is good. And I think that all of this will allow us to experience greater solidarity across the generations. So philanthropy, as I was saying before, what we can do is we can push, we can pilot, we can experience, we can experiment with these different models as we pass on to younger generations our knowledge. So I think that this will be helpful from the public and from the private angle. I have several questions from the audience, so let's take a few minutes to answer some of the questions. They're good ones. Belém sends us a question. How can women be supported, but especially single mothers that have to take care of their children and at the same time hold a job? Susana? Well, yes, I think that has a lot to do with what Marisol just said. I think that we do, as a society, have the obligation to provide professional training to those women that are giving care at home, and help them transition into the labor market so that they can render their services caring for others. So there they have to be trained, they have to be made professionals, and also make certain that their jobs will not be precarious. We need to formalize their employment, and that opens up an opportunity in the labor market, and it's an important one. It cannot be that 1/3 of the women in Latin America of working age cannot go find a job because they have to stay home caring for their relatives. And if they do go find a job, they need to be provided with equitable remuneration. And it cannot be that when they reach retirement age, they will merely contribute to greater poverty. They need to be trained. They need to be made professionals within the health and care sector. And that's something we see in the Spanish model, recognizing professional competences, generating a whole career track so that they can be included in the marketplace, but in a careful fashion, making sure that they are paid in a way that would keep with the pay schedule. Fernando, just to follow up on that, to follow up on what Susana was saying, and I agree with her 100%. And I think that the basis for this is a very far-reaching family agenda, giving priority to single women who are mothers. Also, we need to look at making them professionals later on, but the main thing is that an unwed mother, with children in other words, but perhaps don't wear a wedding ring, they have to be able to go out and find a job and at the same time take care of their children. And often it's the mother, the grandmother, the aunt taking care for this child. But it has to be a structure such that we know that there will be a structure in place if it's needed. Thank you. Okay, we have 3 minutes, and I have a question from Mauricio for Santiago, and it has to do with his presentation. There's a lot of informality in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's something that is very closely related to the possibility of funding these systems. What are the most pressing reforms being implemented in the region to deal with this informality? Well, that's definitely the $64,000 question, and there is no short answer. But I do think that there is an important fact, and that is in Latin America we made a major mistake, and we continue to make the same mistake. We think that informality is what was meant to be. You leave your house, the sun comes up in the east, and in the afternoon, the sun sets in the west, and you say, okay, that's just the way things are. But you leave your house, you see people selling things on the street, but that's not the way the world was meant to be, and that can be changed. And the first part of the answer is we have to no longer tolerate a situation where one half of the population is not protected by the state. And we have to see that as a political obligation for our governments so they can later bring us all sorts of reforms, tax reform, social reform, pension reform. That's something the IDB has worked at for years. And I would ask that Mauricio look at some of the work done by the IDB. But first, the main thing is, first we have to say, enough. This is enough. And in that way, our political representatives, instead of kicking the can down the road, we have to say, okay, we have to review the social contract of Latin America when it has excluded from the institutions of the state one half of the population and a high percentage of our businesses. We have to stop thinking this is normal, and it's then that we can address the problem. The technical details, they can ask you, they can ask all sorts of people at the IDB who have worked on this for years. So thank you, Santiago. And now we really are out of time, but before concluding, I really do want to thank you on behalf of all of us. Thank you for sharing all of your experience with us, and I really do call for a round of applause to thank you.
Entretenido, ¿no?
Thank you all of our panelists for this great discussion. Muchas gracias de nuevo a Ferdinando.
Thank you, Ferdinando, and I thank all of the panelists for this very enriching discussion. And also, I thank our audience. In just a few minutes, we are going to go on to a second seminar. We'll be talking about From Coping to Thriving, Resilience During Shocks. And in this seminar, we're going to be talking about something that is key. How can we prepare for shocks? We are going to hear from leaders, researchers who work to protect our region. So we will be right back. Thank you.
Join us in Paraguay on March 11 to 14 for our most important gathering, the IDB Group's annual meeting. Last year was the IDB Group's record year, with the highest ever level of $35 billion in financing, while strengthening the quality of our projects and processes, and therefore delivering impact. This led us to a year of record recognition, including Multilateral Development Bank of the Year. Now, we need to build on that. The IDB Group will focus on growth, has foundation for development, including private sector network, critical minerals